Hello, and welcome to this second video devoted to astrology. So today we are going to look at some basics regarding our guest, that I introduced to you in the previous video, the armillary sphere. So this tool is a 3D representation of the sky, and it's this tool that we are going to be using throughout this series of 12 videos. So we're also going to be taking a glance at what we call the sky chart or birth chart, which is a 2D representation of the sky at the time of a person's birth. It's that type of representation that the astrologer uses in his work. So we're going to see that the sky chart used by the astrologer is a transposition of a representation of the sky at the time of our birth. So a 3D sky into a 2D representation of the sky. And at the end of the video, we'll look at the strengths and weaknesses of this 2D representation. So I'd like to make a small digression before we jump in. First of all, I'd like to reassure those of you who have already seen a real armillary sphere. So the armillary sphere that is beside me here is not an academic one. It's, because in a real armillary sphere, the poles are not horizontal, as is the case here. So this is a very atypical armillary sphere, and there's a good reason for it. It's an armillary sphere that comes from a store, a French home decoration store, so it's a decorative object. It has nothing scientific, it's not scientifically accurate, and in fact I have tweaked it and corrected some of the construction mistakes with a bit of DIY. I considered using a real armillary sphere, but I thought it was better to actually use this one because, by doing a bit of tweaking, the actual manufacturing defects of this object have become educational tools. And there is another aim to me using this armillary sphere, is that it's a way of using that anybody can acquire a low-cost, cheap armillary sphere, at a very acceptable cost, because real armillary spheres are very costly, and making one yourself is, it's a real art form. And in video number 12, our reference video, I will give you some websites where you can find or purchase armillary spheres. So why that name, armillary sphere? So let's look at the word sphere to start with. When you look at the sky at night, it looks as if you're in a bubble, in a sphere, with all the stars that seem to be pinned to a spherical surface. Our starry space forms a sphere with the Earth at its center, and this sphere that surrounds us, like a bubble, moves around the Earth. This sphere, it revolves around the Earth in 24 hours. I mean, today, of course, we know that this is just an appearance. It's not a physical reality. We know, first of all, that stars are not fixed on a sphere, but that they are thousands of light years apart. Of course, that's something that science is well aware of today. And we know, on the other hand, that it's not the sky that revolves around the Earth, but the Earth that revolves on its axis, which creates this apparent movement. However, from our point of view here, we live on Earth, our home is our planet Earth, and so we deal with an apparent reality. And in astrology it's important because it's on this apparent reality that astrology is based. So it's this apparent reality, the apparent movements of the sky, that lead to this model of the armillary sphere. And in the history of sciences, the armillary sphere is one of the first systems, one of the first mechanisms that was the model of a natural phenomenon. So, armillary sphere, the word armillary now. This word comes from the Latin armilla, that actually means circle, bracelet, ring. You can see this sphere is constituted of a number of rings, circles that represent, materialize some elements or landmarks of the celestial sphere. And these elements of the armillary sphere are the elements we're going to be studying in these videos. So, of course, we'll discover these different armillas, that these rings have meaning in the dynamics of the sky, and that they form the basis of astrological symbolism. So, of course, we're going to discover the zodiac. It's here, as you can see. You can see it's a very complex movement around the Earth. It's pretty complex to comprehend, which is why it's particularly interesting to have a representation in objects such as the armillary sphere. We've added planets. We'll also discover what is known as the celestial horizon, and we'll see that it's thanks to the celestial horizon that we can determine the ascendant. So, all the elements of this 3D object can be found on the astrologer's celestial map, which is a 2D map, where you'll see the zodiac, you'll see the planets, you have a map of the horizon, you also have the zodiac position with respect to this map, etc., etc. All of this and more will be seen on this 2D representation, on this map of the sky, this astrologer's tool. So this representation, this 2D representation, has some strengths and some weaknesses. Obviously, as you can imagine, the 2D representation is extremely convenient. It would be difficult to always work with this tool. So the astrologer can see at a glance the position of all the planets around the zodiac, and he can add a number of things on his map of the sky, the relationship between the planets, etc. A lot of things that are essential to the work of the astrologer. So, great. You might wonder if with a 2D representation of the sky you don't lose part of reality, you know, with this volumetric and movement representation on which astrology is founded. And so the risk, if you're only familiar with 2D, the risk, you know, by not being interested in the sky, we saw this in the first video, is that this 2D map might be a little too abstract, and we might lose some of the dynamic of the birth chart. You know, it might elude us. So the purpose of these videos is to avoid this pitfall and to make this 2D map as lively as possible by showing movement, this dynamic representation of the sky. So we're going to leave it at that for now. Thank you very much, and I'll meet you again in our third video that will be devoted to the history of the armillary sphere. You know, so we're going to focus on its history before we get to know it a little better, etc., etc. So thank you very much, and see you in the next video.